And so the topic of today's call is how patriarchy lives in your body and in your nervous system. So I presented at the IFS conference last year, and one of the questions that I posed to the group I was presenting to was, how do you respond to authority? So just maybe take a moment and notice how your body responds to that question. Notice how your mind responds to that question. What's your initial response or reaction? And just take note of that. And again, if you do want to pop anything in the chat to share, feel free to do so. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, yeah, my reaction to this question and my response to authority. So, my outermost kind of first response protectors, my first line of defense would be anger. Oh, yeah, Sandy sharing too. My reaction is anger. Thanks for sharing. That's my first reaction too. And that was resoundingly the first or the primary response that came when I asked this question last year. And it might have to do with the way that I posed the question, but to me, these angry protectors are often our first line of defense. The ones that get angry and that get big when we're feeling threatened. So when your nervous system senses threat, our protectors can respond in different ways. And for me, again, my first line of defense protectors, I think of my defending part that kind of rushes in to defend me against threats, or my challenging part that really likes to challenge authority, especially if I feel like certain beliefs or actions are being forced on me, if I get the sense that someone is trying to dominate me, that challenging protector steps in. And two of my primary protective responses in my life have been achievement and knowledge. So that challenging part has really like accumulated a lot of knowledge so that when I sense a person who's in a position of authority is trying to almost dominate me with their knowledge, it's like this part has just been accumulating all of that. And I really value knowledge as well and have a lot of curiosity. So it's just kind of curious to think about how these different things that we value in our life can also be a protective response or a survival strategy. So in my first few years of doing IFS, these were some of the primary protectors that I worked with. I've really been making anger my ally. I spent a lot of time in my life feeling very, very angry. It's really important to honor that anger and those angry protectors who have been hurt and treated unfairly, and who've been invalidated. For a lot of people, I think women especially, it hasn't been safe to feel our anger, even when it is justified. So it's really important to be patient with ourselves and allowing us to connect with that anger and just feel it within ourselves in a safe way, which, often requires support from a therapist. But a funny thing happened about a couple of years ago. I remember I was hearing a lot of people talk about people pleasing, and I thought I would really love to understand this dynamic, this people pleasing protector at a deeper level, but it's just not something that I get. That's just not a protector that I have. I'm never going to understand it. I thought at the time uh, don't really feel that drive to really make sure that people are necessarily pleased or happy with me. That was how I was thinking about people pleasing. But then I came into this period of time in my life a couple of summers ago where I had a series of situations in my life present themselves where I had to have difficult conversations with people and tell people things that uh, I wasn't expecting was gonna go well. So I was expecting that there would be a sad reaction or an angry reaction or conflict. And this doesn't have to be with a person who's in a position of authority. It could be with anyone. What I realized when I encountered these situations is that it was actually really hard for me. There were some situations where I had something I wanted to say, and it was like I was frozen. That freeze response of your nervous system. There was some difficult news I had to provide, or I had to set a boundary, and it was like the words were just stuck, like they were cut off. They literally wouldn't come out. And that really surprised me. And it really got me thinking differently about what people pleasing is as I got curious about this dynamic. And I realized that I actually have a very strong people pleasing protector. But it wasn't so much presenting as really wanting everyone to make sure that everyone was happy so much as being absolutely terrified of someone being angry with me, just terrified. And our parts can show up in different ways, right? So we can notice our parts through our patterns of thought, through our emotions, like say anger or fear, anxiety, shame, and also through sensations in the body. And I think that these really young parts and young protectors can often show up more somatically. And so that was more the situation for me with this people pleasing part, that I wasn't really experiencing an inner dialogue around it. It was very somatic, like just shutting down my ability to speak or to stand up for myself or to set a boundary or to say no, whether it was something planned or that needed to happen in the moment. And just this really intense fear of conflict. And so there's different ways that people pleasing can show up. And to me, the way that this part presented for me really spoke to how early this dynamic started in my life. And I've been working with this part of me for the last couple of years. And, it's really softening. I'm finding that I have more capacity to set boundaries and say no. But when you have these parts that are so deeply ingrained in your nervous system, it can really take time, and it's really important to be patient and gentle with yourself. And so I've really started to think about how many of our protectors have to do with the idea of an external authority, and how we can have protectors that get big, right? Ones that defend, challenge, rebel against authority, or that are high achieving, want to accumulate knowledge. And some of these parts have more of that fight energy. And then we can have these other parts that get small or that shrink in the face of authority. So they might be people pleasing or appeasing. They might be caretaking. It's funny, I also didn't really think that I had a strong caretaking protector until I really realized that, to me, the essence of caretaking is feeling responsible for others and feeling responsible for other people's emotions, for their healing. And when I thought about it that way, I realized that part really goes very deep in my system too, the layers of responsibility for others. There's also, sometimes I call this the stay small protector. I've had to work with this one a lot to be able to be on these calls, to be able to give presentations, to be able to do social media videos. When I look back at my early elementary school report cards, they all said, talked about Cheryl would benefit from speaking up more in class. Cheryl's dislike for public speaking is obvious. But nobody in the school system ever seemed to ask, like, why is this person so anxious? Why is it so scary to speak in front of a group? So that's something that can stem from your own personal life experiences and personal trauma. But I think it's also important to look at it from a cultural context. And how is that different for women? Yeah, how have we maybe been conditioned to have those smaller or shrinking reactions to authority or to groups of people. And so it's been a real challenge for me and a real growing edge to be able to speak more confidently, more naturally in front of groups of people. And I really appreciate those of you who've been showing up and those who are new to the call today to support me in this. And hope that the things I share of benefit because I certainly hear from people around me, from people that I support, from colleagues, from friends, that they're really experiencing similar struggles in terms of being able to speak up for yourself, to be more natural and authentic, to say no and set boundaries, sometimes to speak in front of a group. I really wouldn't say it comes natural to me. And you really can't override your nervous system. And it does take practice. It does get easier. But thinking about these protective parts from a nervous system perspective, so I mentioned these ones that get big, that they can have kind of a fighting energy, right? If we think about fight, flight, freeze. So there's also, you might get curious about how you might have certain parts that want to run away or hide, those freezing parts. Right? Maybe the words get frozen. Maybe you feel dissociated. And then there's also this fourth F of fawning, right? Which is really that appeasing, people-pleasing protector. And so if you relate to that dynamic, which I think a lot of people can, it's important to get curious about how that shows up for you, as for me, it did in really subtle ways and wasn't really that noticeable until I had to speak up for myself or say something that might be in conflict with the person that I'm speaking to in whatever situation that's in. So that's when you can really notice that inner conflict coming up between wanting to set a boundary or having something important to share that might be difficult and appeasing or going along with the other person or telling them what they want to hear. And one of the ways I notice this still shows up for me a lot is in laughing. So I feel like I do like to laugh and I have a natural, authentic laugh, but sometimes I catch myself, for example, last week I was out for lunch with a friend, and I think when there's just this kind of low level sort of anxiety still for me socially, I notice this people pleasing part is just kind of laughing and smiling excessively. And it's kind of strange because I'm like aware that it's happening, and yet it's still happening and feels kind of unconscious. I can feel that I'm almost like overdoing it. It's like I'm often laughing at the end of a sentence of what I've said when it doesn't really feel authentic. And now it's not a judgment saying, oh, you need to be more authentic. It's just noticing like, oh yeah, that is how that's showing up in my nervous system. And what I'm calling social anxiety is really just this cue, this aspect of my nervous system that's registering something isn't safe. And now I was out for lunch with a friend who I would say I feel very comfortable with, very safe with. There weren't a lot of people around me, but you can't help what your nervous system's doing. And I'm really curious about how these protective responses and how these trauma responses happen for sensitive and neurodivergent people. So sensitive people are more responsive to their environment, more aware of and connected to their environment, and tend to be highly empathic. So you can kind of sense what other people are going through emotionally and even feel their emotions in your body. And so I think what happens to a lot of us sensitive or neurodivergent folks at a really young age is that you're tuning into the people around you and the pain that they're in. And feeling that pain is really difficult. And so it's only natural that you want to make them happy. Or in more extreme situations, it might be that those people around you were prone to rage and that was absolutely terrifying. So when you think about these people-pleasing or caretaking responses that may have started when you were maybe 2 or 3 years old, it's that deeply ingrained in your nervous system. Hopefully you can be a little bit more compassionate with yourself. It's easy to be hard on yourself. Like, why can't I set boundaries? Why can't I, be more authentic, be in judgment of yourself? So it's important to realize that these protective responses really started because it felt like your safety was at risk. And maybe your safety was at risk. But what I find is that the more sensitive we are, and the more aware are of our environment, and the more empathic we are, the more common it seems to be to go towards these people-pleasing and caretaking responses to try to take care of or manage the emotions of those around us. So these caretaking and people-pleasing parts are types of managers in IFS, which are the protective parts of us who are trying to manage the world around us and our own world and our own emotions. And so again, from a nervous system perspective, looking at polyvagal theory created by Stephen Porges. Um, so there's this neuroception, this kind of sixth sense of detecting danger in your environment. If you've grown up in an environment that wasn't safe, or if you're living in a culture that feels unsafe, that neuroception can always be firing, right? Even if you're out for lunch with a friend who's a really kind person, or in a call with a few people who you know that are all very lovely people, you might still be getting that signal from your nervous system that something isn't safe because it's just been primed by your history. It's been primed by your ancestors, by society, and really a society that hasn't been safe for women to speak up and speak their truth. So again, having compassion for yourself that this response evolved to help you to survive and to stay safe, and it helped our ancestors to stay safe sometimes because it does not always work. And so I was looking up recently what exactly is this fawning response in the nervous system. And what I found in polyvagal terms is that, so Stephen Porges believes that it's a kind of hybrid response. So for those who aren't familiar with polyvagal theory, it essentially talks about three primary nervous system responses. So there's two branches to the parasympathetic nervous system. So I'm not going to get too deep into nervous system stuff today, but I think this can be a helpful framework. So ventral vagal it's like your home and your sense of safety. Or in IFS, we would call this self or self energy. It's that down-regulated nervous system state where you feel calm and confident and compassionate, curious. And for people who have experienced a lot of trauma, it can be really hard to access that state. But that's part of what we do in IFS by releasing these burdens and coming into relationship with our protectors by appreciating them. We start to increase our capacity to access self-energy or that ventral vagal state of safety. And then we bring that self-energy state to these parts, and that's how we find healing through IFS. And so you can also have a sympathetic nervous system response where you're hyper aroused, right? So this is your fight or flight system. So your heart rate's going up, blood is going to your muscles to prepare you to fight or run away. So thinking about those getting big protectors or the ones that want to run away. And then if that fails, you can go into this second branch of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is this dorsal shutdown or collapse. So this is your dissociation, your shutdown, your deep depression. So it can last for a short period of time. It can last for a long period of time for people who are going through depression. And if you think about this in terms of the animal kingdom, the common example is the gazelle who's been caught by the lioness. It can't fight, it can't run away, so it just freezes and plays dead. So maybe that fight or that flight system might be your first line of defense, and this freeze is often the last line of defense when nothing else is available. And so if the gazelle's lucky, the lioness doesn't pay attention and the gazelle jumps up and runs away. The sympathetic nervous system comes back on and it escapes. But what that looks like for people is more of a dissociative state, which can often be who I like to think of dissociation as a kind of a continuum with the extreme end being, you're completely unaware of what's happening and disconnected from your body and kind of in autopilot. But I think there can be a range of this. You might just feel kind of numb, or you might feel not very present. So when I spoke about sometimes feeling like I can notice myself laughing when I'm not intending to make others comfortable, or you might notice yourself kind of fawning, people pleasing when you intended to set a boundary. That can be really frustrating when you're aware of it, but you're still noticing yourself doing it. That is sort of that dissociative state. So what Stephen Porges says is it's actually that fawning or people pleasing is a hybrid state. So there's both a sympathetic activation because you are engaged, you're speaking, you're talking to a person, you have a certain type of body language or laughter or smiling, but there's also this element of dissociation and shutdown where you're kind of functioning, but you're somewhat disconnected. So I found that just a curious way to look at this fawning response. And again, just remembering that we really come into relationship with these protectors by appreciating them. And so just notice if you get frustrated by this dynamic when you notice it happening. And remembering that that part of you might be 2, 3, 4, or 5 years old from when this dynamic started. And so it can take a long time to really heal that. And I think it tends to happen gradually. Sometimes I feel like it can be a little bit of a trap too, to feel like, oh, if I just heal all of the burdens in my system, then eventually this is going to go away. I think we really have to build up that relationship with our protectors. And that's what we'll be doing in the meditation later today is coming into relationship with one of these protectors and um, potentially releasing some of the energy that came in from the culture. So maybe just get curious about a part that's coming up in you today that you might want to spend some more time with. There's also, I think, this component of the choices that you make in the moment. So trauma really can disconnect us from our choice and from our freedom and our autonomy. And that's why choice is often called the ninth C of self-energy. I won't try to name all of the C's right now because I usually end up forgetting one, but I think choice is an important one too, because when you're in that fawning response or that freeze response, or even those big defending, rebelling, challenging responses, there's not a lot of choice. So I think part of it is catching yourself in the moment and just allowing yourself a pause. So just slowing down, maybe taking one slow, deep inhale and exhale might help you to tap into your will, to tap into your capacity to make a pivot, to set a boundary, or to ask for a minute to regroup. I notice that urgency is a real energy that my system carries, and that's probably a whole topic for another call around capitalism, but I've got this little share with you here. Just found this recently. It's like a little snail that's just reminding me always to slow down. And so we access more choice by coming into relationship with our protectors, by unburdening our parts, and also just by slowing down and finding those little moments where you notice that a protector has taken over. And maybe you can just acknowledge that part internally. I often like to place a hand over where I feel the part of my body, which is often in my chest. Maybe that people-pleasing part is feeling afraid. So just taking that breath and tuning in, and maybe it's possible to pivot into a new action. Let me know if there's any questions coming up, if this is making sense, if you can relate to these dynamics or how people pleasing shows up for you. I think it can show up in a lot of different ways. Before we shift into the meditation in the next few minutes, I just wanted to speak a little bit more to patriarchy because I started off asking this question about how do you respond to authority? And I think the way I phrase the question, it almost kind of implies that there's an authority that is trying to dominate you or control you. So, one way of looking at patriarchy is male supremacy. And that's certainly been an aspect of our culture for the last few thousand years. That's taking time to shift too. I think this is, while it's in many ways a scary time to be alive, it's also an exciting time to be alive with women starting to reclaim their power and their authority and their voices, and all people, of course, not just women, but especially people who have been silenced and oppressed in our society. So I think patriarchy really transcends gender to be more of this external authority who is acting out of, um, let me restart that again. This external authority who is asserting power and control and domination over. So I see patriarchy as being an external source of authority who's asserting control or power over you rather than empowering you from within. And I think kind of the brother of patriarchy is paternalism, which is the concept that there's an external authority who knows what is best for you or who knows what is right for you better than you do. So paternalism literally means father knows best, which was traditionally the way in family structures, at least in the West. And so this paternalistic attitude really leaks out into other aspects of our culture. It may be within the family. So this patriarchy paternalism dynamic can play out in a kind of authoritarian type of authority. So this can also be in communities, in societies, in politics. And this idea of paternalism as, I think initially, or some people probably still do believe this is a healthy concept, but it sort of presupposes that someone is actually acting in your best interest. But when we see people who are being corrupted by their lust for power, for money, with greed, a lot of the time people are not acting in your best interest. And that maybe what we're evolving to as a species is reclaiming our own inner authority. And where authority figures in society can maybe not be acting through these authoritarian and paternalistic values. So when I think about that of myself as a physician, in my previous job, I gave quite a few talks on informed consent, which I feel really passionately about. And I really see our role as physicians to be presenting people with information and allowing them to make the decision for themselves. And now a lot of people want to ask what your opinion is, and you can share that, but that it's really important to recognize that your opinion is not absolute truth, that it isn't your role to push your opinion on to others, and that you don't actually know what is best for another person's life because you're not living in their body, you haven't had their experiences, you can't know exactly what their beliefs and values are. So that's something that has taken a while for me to acknowledge as a physician because it really wasn't what I was taught in school, where I think there are really some unhealthy aspects of authority and paternalism and patriarchy still in medicine. where it's really easy to see that line blurred in the belief that being an expert means that you're an expert in someone else's life or that you should be making decisions for them. So that's where some of this work around patriarchy and paternalism has been really helpful for me as a person in a position of authority in medicine. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that, and something that we probably don't talk enough about in our medical training. Definitely don't talk enough about in our medical training, if I'm being honest. But then there's also these impacts of patriarchy in the way that your protectors respond. Because I think if we had healthier forms of authority in our society, that we wouldn't have to have all of these protectors responding in these different ways. If we had more authority figures who were helping people to connect with their inner authority. And now, of course, when we're children, especially we need to have authority figures, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with authority, right? Children need guidance. Adults need guidance too. But it's important that people in authority are supporting you in connecting with yourself, in connecting to your own self energy, in connecting to your own truth, and discovering what's right and true for you, rather than acting from a place of power over. It's a place of power with that doesn't involve control, domination, subjugation, oppression. And so I think when I ask that question, how do you respond to authority? Because the burden of patriarchy and paternalism is so great in our culture, that we automatically assume that authority is trying to control or dominate us, because that's been our experience. So I think we'll move to the meditation soon. Just curious if anyone has any questions or wants to share how this is landing. It's a topic I feel really passionately about. I think we talk a lot about patriarchy in our society, but not often about how this actually lands in our parts and in our trauma. I'm getting a thumbs up from Joanne here. Thanks, Joanne. Some resonance. I want to make sure we leave at least 15 minutes here for the meditation and are honoring everyone's time. Okay, looks like here's a question. What happens when you absolutely know you're fawning and people pleasing, but when you say no, it makes you feel worse? Then you are supporting and assisting the next generation to speak up, but how to do that? Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I'll speak to the first part of that first. I mean, I think there's this common polarization between these two types of protectors, the getting big or getting small ones. So that's what I've found. Historically, my angry protectors would set boundaries for me or say no. And then there would be a lot of guilt afterwards. Or realistically, you could even be having setting a health, so what we might call a healthy boundary from a fairly grounded, self-led place, and still have this feeling of guilt afterwards. Or you've said feel worse. I'm kind of making an assumption that's guilt, because that's what I've noticed in myself and in other people I've supported. I think that's often another way that the people-pleasing protector can show up, feeling guilty or feeling worse for saying no or setting a boundary. So that could be a really great trailhead for this meditation today, that feeling worse feeling, whether that's guilt or something else. So it's just something to get curious about, right? And how we've really been taught to put other people's needs and desires ahead of our own, that it makes sense that we'd be conditioned to feel worse after we do stand up for ourselves or set a boundary. And how to support the next generation in speaking up, but how to do that. I mean, even just having these conversations, I think is really important. And um, if you're doing this work yourself, you're also modeling for the next generation how important that is. That even if it is hard for you, that you're still showing up and you're working with your parts in therapy or in meditation, and getting curious about these responses. And I think these are patterns that are shifting generationally too. So while, I think that one of the best things that we can do is this healing within ourselves and then role modeling that, it's just having open conversations about it as well. That's a great question, though. I hope I answered some aspect of it for you. But I can definitely relate to the feeling worse after standing up for yourself. Okay, I think we'll shift into the meditation. So just invite you to take a moment to shift your attention inward. It might feel supportive to take a moment to just reconnect with that tree trunk, that grounding cord that we started with today, coming out of the base of your spine, connecting you to the earth. And so that as you approach this trailhead, that you can feel some sense of groundedness and connection, allowing you to be more present with it. See if you can welcome this protector that you'd like to get to know, to be present with you. In whatever way you're used to noticing it. So it might be an emotion, it might be a pattern of thought or a sensation in your body. Just inviting it to be present with you. And see if you can locate it somewhere in or around your body. And just focusing in on that location and seeing what you notice. Is it on the outside of your body or deeper within? Does it have a weight, a size, or a texture? Does it have a color or another image that goes along with it? And seeing if you can access that curiosity, that openness, and just checking to see if there's any parts trying to help you, any efforting. For me, that shows up sometimes like kind of scrunching my forehead or getting tense in my shoulders. And if you notice that, seeing if you can just relax a little more. And if it's possible to have a little bit of lightness or amusement around it, that can be helpful too. And sometimes that can be hard with heavier topics. And as you focus on this part of you, noticing if there's an emotion that goes along with it. Are there any words that go along with it? You could even ask it, what do you want me to know? And just knowing you don't have to think of a response, just see what comes to the surface. You could ask, how have you been trying to help me? And what kind of areas do you show up in my life? What kind of things do you say or do? Where did you learn this strategy? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? And if it's possible, really extending some compassion and appreciation to this part of you for how hard it's been working, for how scared it might be. And you could also ask it if it were a possibility, would you be interested in getting a break or having a rest every now and then? Maybe even trying a different way. Knowing that we're not going to ask this protector to give up its role, and it may not think that it's possible to find another way, but just offering that as a possibility, maybe even starting with taking a rest and seeing if there's an openness to that idea. And next, I'm going to invite you to imagine or visualize a kind of gauge or thermometer And something that goes from 0 to 100 might be a gas gauge. And ask if this part can show you what percentage of this strategy or this energy has come from our culture. And see if you can get a sense visually or internally somehow. What percentage of this came from the culture? Was it a lot or a little bit? It may even want to show you how that happened. It might have been learned from someone, might have been kind of absorbed. And once you get a sense of that, you can ask if there's a willingness to release the energy that was absorbed from the culture. Again, we're not going to ask this part to give up its role, but if there's a part of this that doesn't belong to you and you're ready to release that, we can support that today. And if there's a willingness to do so, you can imagine something out in front of you, maybe a foot or two away, that symbolizes the aspect of the culture that you absorbed this from. So if it is patriarchy, you might just imagine in your mind's eye some sort of symbol to represent this aspect of our culture. And we're going to use this symbol as a kind of magnet that's just going to pull this cultural burden right out of this part. You can invite the part to release it into the symbol. And just go ahead and allow that to happen. You don't have to use any effort. If there's a willingness inside, you can just allow it to happen. You might notice an energy shifting in your body. You might see some energy being released. Just take your time with this. Just check your whole body for any remaining energy of this burden. And check your fingers and toes. Just release all of that into that symbol. And once that feels complete, you can check to see how your part would like to destroy this. So you might imagine yourself building a fire and releasing the symbol into the fire, or blowing it up, or burying it in the earth, releasing it into the water, asking for the support of nature to transmute this, whatever feels right for you. And just watching, sensing, or imagining this burden being destroyed and transmuted. And once that feels complete, you can ask this part of you if there's any new qualities they would like to take in, or anything they are feeling disconnected from they'd like to reclaim. Just go ahead and invite those new qualities into your body. You might imagine or visualize this new energy coming in, breathing it into all of the cells in your body, into your whole being. Great. And just taking a moment to really thank this part of you for trusting with you, connecting with you today to whatever extent that was possible. And seeing if this part would like you to check in on it again later, or if there's any other way it would like to stay connected to you in the next little while. And if it feels right for you, you can make that commitment to check in again. Maybe also setting the intention to be patient with yourself. If you notice that reaction coming up again, it is going to take time to heal this. It's going to take time to feel safe again inside of yourself, or maybe for the first time. You can take a couple of deep breaths, just thanking yourself for showing up today, taking this time to tune into yourself, to support your healing. This isn't easy work. And I'm sending my appreciation for your showing up today, taking this time for yourself to be in community, and just coming back to the room around you, the Zoom space around you, whenever that feels complete.